David, thank you very much for these very enlightening remarks and very interesting proposals, which I think can contribute greatly to international security, cybersecurity and stability. Thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Mr. James Lewis. Jim, besides being a very good friend, is also a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in Washington, and directs its technology program. Before of States and Commerce at the Foreign Service, as a Foreign Service officer, as a member of the Career Senior Executive Service. His government experience includes a range of political military assignments. Lewis helped develop the initial U.S. policies on encryption and internet security and led the U.S. delegations to the Wassenaar Arrangement Experts Group in advanced civil and military technologies. He was the rapporteur for the UN Group of Government Experts, to be known the DGE, which will very probably come up several times during the presentation, on information security since 2010, 2013, and 2015 sessions. Lewis is an internationally known expert and has testified numerous times before Congress. He has a close research partnership with the China Institutes for Contemporary International Relations and has led a long-running Track 2 dialogue on cybersecurity with them. His current research examines sovereignty, strategy after deterrence, and internet innovation. Lewis received his PhD from the University of Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. James Lewis.
Hey, good, they got the right place. I was wondering what they'd show. Thank you. But yesterday Chris Roberts wore a kilt and a blue beard, and I thought I would wear my national costume, which is a blue suit and a tie. So it's nice being back in Tel Aviv. I was last here 20 years ago, and it's changed quite a bit. So let me try a few things. The first is that why do we need to think about international stability, and what does that mean? And one way to think about this is there is no technical solution to cybersecurity, right? If you didn't get that out of the Snowden papers, you should know that by now. Yes, you can do things to minimize risk and mitigate risk. They're important to do, but there is no technical solution. I had somebody from Google tell me once, Google has the same capabilities as NSA. And I said, that's really cool. I had no idea you guys had nuclear submarines. Governments have unique capabilities, and so thinking about how to minimize risk means there is no technical solution, it has to be a political solution. A political solution, but it also has to be a transnational solution, an international solution. There is no national solution because this is a transnational threat. Most of the attacks will come from outside your borders, so you need a political international solution, and that kind of points to the UN, right? For what we're thinking about. One of the changes in the last few years has been a tremendous revolution in how people think about the internet, and that is that we had this millennial vision that it was a global commons that a multi-stakeholder model could control, and that governments would be less important and borders would be non-existent. And unfortunately, that turned out to be largely wrong. You might remember somebody said we'd seen the end of history. Well, history's back with a vengeance. And that means that we now have to think of this in terms of national approaches where states are the most important actors. Sometimes people say, well, we need the multi-stakeholder model to apply for international stability. There's a role for it, but at the end of the day, it's states, it's not companies, it's not NGOs. I mean, sometimes people will say we need technical experts in these negotiations, and I say we also need vegetarians, right? Why not? Because this is real diplomacy. When you see technical experts in the room, they're very often baffled, and I know some of them are upset. The internet used to be something that they dominated in, and now states have become the most important actors. So no technical solution, international politics, okay? Where are we in that? And I think in that sense, almost inadvertently, the most important forum has turned out to be this United Nations group of government experts that comes under the first committee, the Committee for Disarmament and International Security. In 2010, the GGE, after a GGE group of government experts, after some rather intense discussions, managed to agree on 8 lines. But those 8 lines set out the negotiating agenda that we have followed ever since. They said that the international community should develop norms for international peace and security and stability in cyberspace. They should develop confidence-building measures that includes exchange of information and other things, and that they should build capacity among nations around the world to improve their cybersecurity. And this has set the stage now for the last 6 years, and it still continues to be the negotiating agenda. Capacity building has sort of spun off and become a cottage industry. Everyone loves capacity building, right? Because capacity building, either if you're a big country, it gives you a chance to tell other countries what to do, and if you're a little country, you hope that you'll get some money. But the difficult part turns out to be norms. Confidence building measures, there's been progress in the ASEAN Regional Forum, in the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe. We're seeing good progress in confidence building measures, but norms turns out to be difficult. And the most difficult of the norms turns out to be the application of international law, right? 2010 set the negotiating agenda. 2013 saw international agreement on the political principles that guide state behavior in cyberspace. And those principles were the primacy of the UN Charter, that all activities in cyberspace fall under the UN Charter, right? The primacy of international law, existing international law. This agreement embedded cybersecurity in the context of state relationships, right? And the third one was, which I can't remember, that's embarrassing. Oh, national sovereignty. How could I forget, right? So, international law, UN Charter, national sovereignty. We've put cybersecurity in the framework of state-to-state relations. And some people say, well, what about non-state actors? What about private groups? What about hackers? These are important to think about, and it's a difficult issue because one of the problems with cybersecurity, as you've heard over and over again, is it spreads over our traditional definitions. Is it arms control? Is it non-proliferation? Is it state-to-state? And the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. But the primacy of states, both in being responsible for the security of their citizens and for possessing the most advanced modes of attack, puts the focus on state behavior, right? So 2013 laid out the principles for what we would do in negotiating for international stability. And there was a bit of a surprise in here, I think, for the people who track these negotiations like me, which is that it turns out that the agreement that international law applied was exceptionally difficult to implement. And that would be because there's a fundamental dispute in how we think about cybersecurity. And that dispute is a cyber attack like a weapon of mass destruction? Is it a WMD? If it's a WMD, we should stigmatize it, we should ban it. The model here might be the Treaty on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, which says no weapons in space. And some people have said, and it's not an unreasonable position, no weapons in space, no weapons in cyberspace, right? The alternative approach is, of course, that this is like a conventional weapon. It's something that states will use, states will acquire. Many states now are acquiring offensive cyber attack capabilities. And therefore, we should embed it in the laws of armed conflict. We should embed it in international humanitarian law. That will say we can use this weapon, but it has to be used with the concepts we find in the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions, right? So you have two very different approaches here, and that's a fundamental problem. The people who want to ban or stigmatize cyber attack as if it was a WMD, and the people who want to say, no, it's just a conventional weapon, we should be allowed to use it subject to proportionality, distinction, discrimination, all the laws that apply to warfare, right? And it's a hard one because a cyber weapon, and I use that term loosely, a cyber attack can have strategic effect. It may not have mass effect. Cyber attacks are more like a PGM in some ways, a precision-guided munition, right? We have this old notion that it's like a worm or a virus and it will spread globally, and that's not how it works. There's specific targets, the attack vehicle, the payload goes after that specific target. It's a PGM, but it can have strategic effect. If I target your electrical sector, your banking sector, your nuclear command and control. And so one of the underlying tensions here is that we've created a new way of waging conflict that doesn't really fit our WMD model, although it can have effects similar to a WMD, doesn't really fit our conventional weapons model because it can do more than a conventional weapon. And so the international community is wrestling with how to deal with this. And there will be another GGE this year, starting in August, that will look at these things. How it will go, I think they'll get agreement, but we don't know what they'll get agreement on. So this is a fundamental dispute. And some of the issues that come up are, well, what is an attack? Well, I don't know. There's a strong desire in the international community not to define attack, right? And that's a dilemma because so much of international law is predicated on the notion that this is the use, anything above this threshold is the use of force, anything below it isn't the use of force. And so when you decide something is an attack or the use of force is crucial for applying international law in the UN Charter. But nations don't want to agree on this. There is an implicit understanding that any cyber action that results in physical destruction or human casualties will qualify as an attack, but there's clearly a gray area. Was Sony an attack, right? By the way, I heard somebody say that it was hypothetically North Korea. It wasn't hypothetically North Korea, it was North Korea, right? Don't have any doubts about that. If you have doubts, see me later. What was Aramco? Aramco, you wiped data on a disk, you destroyed hard drives. Was it an attack? Was it Stuxnet was clearly an attack. But Saudi Aramco, Sony, those fall into a gray area. So one of the problems we have is coming up with a solution to apply international law to develop how states behave responsibly. When we can't yet agree on attack, weapon, any of the things that would apply to conventional warfare. One of the things we're also wrestling with is that GGE was a very valuable vehicle in the last 6 years for making progress. It may have reached the end of its utility. I think there'll be agreement in the next year, but we need to think about what will take its place. And some people have said, move this issue to the Committee on Disarmament. Create an open-ended committee like we have for outer space, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses for Outer Space, right? But there's no agreement on this. So we have a situation where we have definitional problems, we have disagreement over what the venue is. A couple points on this. It's probably time to move to some kind of formal agreement. This will take years to develop, but we need to start thinking about what a formal agreement among states on international security would look like. It's probably time to think about how we embed this in the United Nations framework. The GGE is kind of a proxy approach. You need the UN, you need formal agreement. And one way to think about this is that we have formal agreements and institutions to manage stability for the monetary system. The IMF, the IFIs, the International Financial Institutions, will probably need to move to something like this for cybersecurity, right? So there is no technical solution. We need to find a political solution, but we're at a very early stage in coming up with this agreement. So with that, why don't I stop? Thanks very much.